So in the past, I've been very critical of Netflix. I think I said things like, it is the greatest mass producer of garbage on the internet. It is single handedly destroying film and TV all by itself. And that it'll give money to anybody who comes forward with an idea and has absolutely no quality control. And I stand by all of that. That's not to say there aren't good shows on Netflix, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think my biggest issue with Netflix is just the lack of general quality control. And if you guys want, I can review some more Netflix movies and just tear them apart and say how bad they are. And just like they're a lot of them are just very low budget, but they don't do a good job with the low budget. It really gives you the impression just no one cared when it was making them. They just had to get something out and put it on Netflix, or else people were going to cancel their monthly subscription. My other issue is they just have to like inject left wing political issues into everything. They just have to shove in diversity or social liberalism or multiculturalism or people exploring their sexual orientations, or like they just have to shove it in. And it's like sometimes I don't want a show to have right or left wing political messages. I just want to watch a TV show. You know what I mean? Like I just want to watch something and like get in with the characters. If there's themes, maybe they're not particularly political. I face enough political stuff on a daily basis. There's nothing wrong with having a show about political themes. I really like the 3%, and it's entirely about political themes. But it's a political show. It's what it's supposed to be about. It's an appropriate use of it. Kind of like how in Black Mirror, really disturbing, weird stuff happens that I probably wouldn't like in other shows, but that's kind of the point of Black Mirror. Black Mirror is kind of I guess you could say almost a reboot of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits and that kind of thing. But like I said, I think that's my biggest issue with Netflix is you'll be watching. Like I tried watching one episode of Archie and I couldn't get through it. I mean Riverdale. And I tried watching one episode of Sabrina. I couldn't get through it. It's just so obviously political. I just can't watch it. There's lots of like most basically all sitcoms are liberal, well, with the exception of the Woody Allen one that they canceled. But like I can at least watch something like Big Bang Theory and it like just turn my brain off and just kind of be like, okay, this is kind of lame, but can get a bit of a chuckle out of me. That's kind of my issue with Netflix. They just have to politicize absolutely everything, and it's low quality mass produced garbage by and large. That being said, there are a couple gems on it, and this is one of them. If I had to say like what I like on Netflix, You was really good. I did a review recommending that. You was really good. The OA, which I need to do a review on, but that show is so freaking weird. I don't even know how to review it. The OA season 1 was pretty good. It's a very divisive show, and I can see why. Black Mirror is very much a hit or miss thing. Some episodes of Black Mirror are amazing, and some of them are unwatchable. It varies very wildly, but it's kind of like The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone were also like that, where it would alternate between. It's a very difficult format to do properly, just because how karmatic you want to make people's downfalls. Like it can very easily be disproportionate. So that's good. They occasionally will make a good documentary. Like they had forget what the series is, but they had a really good thing about. I think it was like something on corporate greed. They had a really good documentary on BMW. They had the movie they did on Ted Bundy, which I might do a review on separately with Zac Efron, was amazing. Which was one of like the legitimately scariest, most fascinating things I've ever seen. They seem to do crime fairly well, so that's pretty good. Black Mirror is okay. Their superhero shows, I think, are trash. So, I mean, Netflix is kind of a mixed bag. Or should I say there's, like, shows on Netflix that are watchable. Watchable enough that I don't cancel my subscription, largely just because I share it with my family, which is probably against terms of service, but I digress. So, the 3%. This is a show I watched since it first came out. it was just something that popped up in my feed, and I'm like, a Brazilian show. Okay, that's kind of interesting. I liked City of God, and I the two Elite Force movies are some of my like favorite action movies of all time. Elite Force 2 is brilliant. If you haven't seen, it's at least Force Elite Squad, The Enemy Within. I highly recommend it. One of the best crime movies ever made. It's like the Brazilian Dark Knight. It's very similar, I guess you could say, in that regard. But I'm like, okay, I'll watch it. And I started watching it, and I kind of immediately got hooked. And like, this is like a teenage dystopian story that's actually well done and actually does something a bit different. Maybe it's just because they had a budget when they were making this show. Maybe because they actually took time into developing like characters whose names I can remember. That's always to me kind of like the basic level of a show, whether or not I can remember the characters' names and something like definitive about them is I think to me kind of the very lowest level of a show or book or movie or whatever. And I immediately got into the characters. I liked them. The show has some issues like all shows do. It is kind of cheesy. The pacing can have problems. The lore background doesn't always make a ton of sense. But as far as like teen dystopian things go, this is pretty much as good as it gets. So just kind of as a brief recap. So the 3% takes place in a future Brazil. So an unspecified, I don't know if it was ever really adequately explained. I think it was global warming or a blight or something. Basically, the world underwent an environmental disaster. And the very wealthy were able to build the offshore, which is an island I think is only connected to the inland by an underground underwater, like, no, underground, because it's like in tunnels under the ground submarine or something like that. And the top 3% of the population get to live on the offshore, and it's super advanced. There's trees, there's flowers, everything's green, everything's beautiful, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the other 97% of society has to live on the inland, which is a third world hellhole. I don't even know if they can grow food. I don't know what people eat there. I've never seen any real agriculture. But it's worse than like a lot of African countries, from what I'm able to say. Maybe it's kind of like a Saharan African country, because in some of them there's at least like some wildlife and like some plants and stuff, but they seem to live in like a total desert. So yeah, so 97% of the population live there, and I think a lot of what they do is like unskilled labor or like manufacturing work for the offshore. So there's 3% of the population that gets to go to the offshore. So it's decided upon based in their bizarre view of the world based on merit. So there's a thing called the process in which only 3% of the people who take the process can pass. So there's a number of different things that the process screens for. It's kind of like a lot of these things like Hunger Games or something like that, where there's like the tests they have to go through. So it tests on intelligence, like visual spatial, problem solving, teamwork, ruthlessness, ambition, honesty, the ability to lie. And what you very quickly like feel in the first season, at least, is most of the people who pass the process seem to be like total sociopaths. Like that seems to be the main screening criteria, is your ability to screw over other people in order to make it to the end. And I don't know if that's really a good way of choosing the elite, because a lot of the people on the offshore seem like total sociopaths. They seem like absolutely like terrible people who have no empathy and are just constantly involved in power struggles with each other. So kind of to me, the really dystopian thing about this is because they live as an absolute meritocracy, people on the offshore are not allowed to have children. So everyone who goes to the offshore has to be sterilized. So you get an implant in your arm and it prevents you from ever having children. And this is like to me where the real horror of the show is, because I'm just looking at it, I'm like, so their plan is they're going to take the highest IQ people and remove them from the gene pool That's a good idea. We're going to take the like healthiest, smartest, the best people in society. We're going to make it so they're incapable of reproducing, and that's going to make things work out okay. It's not that's not going to have any dysgenic effects whatsoever. But they're a meritocracy. They're kind of like, I don't know if they have a very similar perspective, I think, to a lot of libertarians and a lot of some people on the left, where they believe that people are completely interchangeable. So they don't think there's any genetic basis. Like they don't think they think it's largely an effort thing. So like the people who get to go there because they passed some like really complex visual spatial puzzle, it's not, at least to a certain extent, that the person was born with those abilities. It's that they just tried harder. So the inland's probably going to get worse and worse as time goes on, as the average IQ keeps dropping, and the people who don't have like bad diseases get removed from the population. I don't know, it seems like a really bad idea. So the first season is about the process, and our heroes go through it. Some of them pass, some of them don't. The tests are really interesting. There's a lot of like really good drama because some of the people who are taking the process are members of the cause. So we don't know exactly what the ideology of the cause is, if they're socialists, if they're like Christian, if they're just people who think this system's fucked up. We don't exactly know, but they're like this revolutionary group who wants to destroy the process and end the segregation between the offshore and the inland. And it probably will surprise people, but I actually kind of agree with the cause. Because the offshore has so many resources and so much technology. There's no reason they couldn't start to develop the inland. There's no reason they couldn't start to provide education. I mean, later in season 3, we see that they could very easily give them collectors, which will produce limitless amounts of fresh water, medicine, like all these things they could provide very easily without really impacting their own standard of living. But they have this whole thing where they just view the people who live on the inland as subhuman, and that they're there entirely because of moral failings on their point. So, so yeah, I kind of agree with the cause. The system doesn't make any sense. I oppose it, as I said, from solely on the grounds that it's dysgenic, and it seems to select for people who are complete sociopaths. But yeah, there's no reason they can't develop the inland. They could even take like the top 20% and put like the other people in chart, like the top 10%. I guess it would be the top 13% because they'd remove the top 3%. The next 10% they could like make a leadership cast on the inland and like give them like food and stuff to have as many children as possible to try to improve the genetics there. But I don't know. They don't want to do that for some reason. And in season 2, we find out that the reason the world is like it is to a certain extent is the founding trio, the people who set up the offshore initially, screwed over the inland. They blew up the power plants there and the water supply and that kind of thing. So when they screwed up that, they left all the businessmen and politicians who had built the offshore stranded, because it wasn't going to be based on wealth. It was going to be based solely on merit. And by destroying the inland, it prevented the inland from ever having the military resources to try to take the offshore. And it basically established a permanent position of superiority between the two. So for the first 2 seasons, we have all this back and forth, all this intrigue. People keep switching sides, etc. So at the end of season 2, Michelle manages to get a data archive of everybody who has yet to take the process, all like their biometrics, that kind of thing. So the cause's goal was to erase all of that. So then they would have no way to hold the process anymore. They'd have no way to know who passed, who failed, who still has to run it. They'd have no way to track it or anything like that. But Michelle opts to not do that, and instead cuts a deal with the offshore that she won't delete it if they give her a whole bunch of resources to start her own community that's neither the offshore nor the inland. And it's kind of what I had suggested. So the offshore basically gives them like this collector that makes an unlimited amount of clean water, seeds. I think it's some sort of like fusion reactor, power generator, all this kind of stuff. And with just unlimited water and unlimited electricity, that alone you can do pretty much anything with. So they build like this fortified shelter out in the desert. It's like it's huge, and they let anybody who wants to come in, and it just everybody works, everybody eats. I think they're going to set up some education. They have medicine, all that kind of stuff, and I'm like, well, this seems like a really good idea. But the third season is all about the offshore trying to sabotage the shell because they don't want to see people who didn't make it through the process succeed. They don't want to see them having happy or decent lives. Because if they do, then that will mean that their whole thing doesn't make any sense. Because it doesn't make any sense. And even if this whole thing does seem kind of absurd, I can see people thinking this way. I can see kind of like this extreme meritocracy kind of taking over. I think it is very much in line, and you can kind of see this with how the left has completely embraced free market, unregulated capitalism, and abandoned workers' rights. I think it is very inherently compatible with both a libertarian or like a social justice ideology, because once again, it ignores that things like biology, culture, psychology, all these things exist, and just maintains that people are exactly the same as one another, even if there's no actual evidence or basis for such an idea. So season 3, my kind of issue with it is it's not like it's bad. I enjoyed it, but it's kind of a rehash because like the shell gets sabotaged in the first like episode, and then they have to do a process on the shell to determine who gets to stay in the shell until they get everything up and running again. It's like, do we really need this again? We already did this in the first season. So then the whole season is like a coup against Michelle, and like the offshore is going to take over the process again. The offshore is going to take over the shell and use it as a place to raise people for the process, which doesn't make any sense. I don't really get it. I think they just want to destroy it. And it's just like a nothing burger. Just nothing happens for most of the season. It's very like intense. You have good character interactions. It's kind of hard to say the actors do a good job when it's obviously dubbed, but the actors do a good job. But just a nothing burger. And then the season ends on a cliffhanger where the military has overthrown the offshore civilian government in a coup, and they're going to wage a war against both the shell and the inland for some reason. And it was like, couldn't that have just happened like halfway through this season? Why did we need this whole season of just nothing going on? But I don't know. Apparently, people just don't think that way. They don't really think when they go ahead and make these things. So, all the same, I'm going to say I thought this was a good season. I definitely recommend this season. I'd recommend this show in general. Probably the best thing I can think of on Netflix at the moment. So, definitely watch the show, and I'll talk to you guys. Oh, right.